and probably just a little touch of the blue. And as I'm applying the paint here, I'm being, fairly careful, but I'm also just trying to include a little bit of texture. So you can see I've got a little bit of white showing on the brush there, and that's kind of automatically mixing in. So the paint isn't mixed too thoroughly, so that automatically creates a little bit of variation, and it's a lot quicker to do that than try and paint in every little nook and cranny. And really, you don't want to do that anyway, in my opinion, if you're painting distant cliffs. You want to hint at the texture, but you definitely don't want to describe it because it's too far away. Although in real life, you can proactively think, I'm going to look at the texture of that cliff. When it comes to painting it and making it seem distant, you don't want to do that. So a few seconds ago, there was a small time jump of a few seconds. I blocked in the lower section of the cliff, and you can see now I'm sweeping in a pale grey and moving around the line work of the of that sweep of beach that I put down earlier, letting that blend into the paint, sweeping right across that parasol and that person I drew there. So what I'm trying to do is, just in the same way I blocked in the sky, I've got to block in the beach. But the beach, as you can see, I'm sat right on these pebbles, and you can see the multitude of colours and shapes I've got there. And when you look out ahead, it's impossible to paint it, basically. There's millions upon millions of pebbles and colours and shapes and things. So what I tend to focus on initially is just trying to create a sense of, a base tone, a sense of perspective. So you can see that the sweeping line helps create a sense of perspective. It leads the eye off into the distance. The brush strokes I've put down most recently, and that I'm about to do in a moment, they're forming an inverted V. It might not be a perfectly inverted V, but they are acting as perspective lines. And equally, me blending the paint into the watercolor marker leaves some of that showing. So I've still got some perspective lines there from the original drawing. And the blending of the marker into the paint adds that bit of randomness, just like I was talking about with the cliff face. So when you've got an incredibly complex expanse of color and texture, I find it best to just sort of think, okay, well, if none of that complexity was there, what would I have? So if it wasn't complex and you just sort of magically concreted the beach and did it in such a way it was a completely smooth surface, it might look like something I've got there in front of me on the paper now. That said, we don't want to leave it just dull and grey, so I'm introducing some more colours. And the great thing is, when you've got tons of colours there, you can be free with your colour choices. You don't have to try and match it exactly. So I'm putting in a little bit of purple now, sweeping that in wet, but still being quite conscious of the direction of brushstroke. So I want to maintain some of that subtle hint of perspective, so the foreground brushwork kind of leads the eye off into the distance. But changing the colour up now so that it's gone a little more towards the brown, the orangey brown. So I'm cheating a little bit, you see, those strips of colour, they're not really there. But by having the pale grey on the right sweeping round in that kind of distorted C shape, as in the letter C shape, and then the blue line of the watercolour mark echoing that, then I've got a straight line of pale purpley pink, then the orangey brown coming down, and now I'm putting in a darker purple. It's not really a representation of what's there, it's certainly not exactly, but I'm putting in these different coloured strips to give a bit of variation, but keeping the shapes so that they taper off into the distance. And now that the paint on my brush is starting to run out a little bit, now I am using a little bit of dry brush, or as dry as it can be, because I'm going through still wet paint, to, sorry, I just hit my finger on the laptop there, to just add a little bit of texture to the beach surface. And now back in with a much paler version of that grey colour to in part obscure the some of the drawing and just make it a little bit clearer what's going on over there, but also just to give a hint of some of the light catching, and the pebbles are a little paler in that section as well. So I really wish I'd discovered, I think I've probably said in previous videos, but it comes to mind every time I do it, or every time I watch back the footage of me painting at a beach. I really wish it's something I'd pursued, much earlier in life, plein air painting, and just working at the coast. I was doing other things that I was enjoying, so you can't do everything, and I was doing plenty of art, but I should have done more outdoor stuff many years ago, because I really, really love it. It's so much fun, and so relaxing as well. So now, just dragging the paint across the undercoat of colour that I've got there to add a little bit of texture to that bank of pebbles, which is going down quite steeply towards the water. So you can see across the entire painting at the moment, I haven't really painted anything individually. I haven't painted an individual leaf or even an individual tree. I haven't painted an individual hedge as such, and I certainly haven't done an individual pebble. So we're just kind of building up a framework and a foundation onto which I can then apply selective areas of detail and key features. Now you notice I'm using a flat brush, and that's generally speaking my go-to when I paint. Not always, especially if it's watercolor. I might use a round mop, and I do enjoy using a big round brush for acrylic from time to time, although that's pretty rare these days. But the flat's really good because you can switch between a narrow line, a small mark, and a big swathe of color, within less than a second, just by changing the angle of the brush. Okay, so having covered the entire paper with paint now I can start to make adjustments here and there. So first thing, come in with a darker purple for the pebbles near the water there, because it's difficult to see from the reference I'm showing you, but things do get quite a bit darker there. And then, just like I was saying a moment ago, I was able to switch just then from a wide brushstroke to some narrow brushstrokes, and noticed that I angled them at the angle of the incline of the pebbles. So almost every mark I make, I'm doing something similar there, but with the brush applied in the normal way. Almost every mark I make is designed to add a contour in some way or give some extra information beyond colour. So there's always a drawing element with most of what I do. Now I'm probably fiddling a little bit more than I need to with the water, because the water in this particular painting, it's almost incidental, I would say. It may not appear to be the case here at this stage of the painting, but when all the people are in, really I want the focus to be on the people. So with the benefit of hindsight, I think I could have left those dark marks out of the water, and perhaps even the little bit of white that I've put in along the edge there. But nevertheless, no harm done, I don't feel. So I'm just adding in a little bit of variation in colour with a green, which is pretty close to a pure blue actually. And I'm doing that to just add a little bit of texture and a little bit of variation in the colour, but also blue is obviously a cool colour, and cold colours tend to push things back off into the distance. But really the main source of an illusion of depth in this painting, I'm hoping, is going to come from the perspective lines that I've mentioned already, and then also the people, because we're obviously evolved to recognize faces and people. It's a very strong instinct. And so if you've got somebody, in the foreground of a certain size, and then as people go off into the distance in the painting, they're going to appear to become smaller and smaller and smaller. That's going to be the main visual cue, which I hope will create a sense of depth within this picture. Now this more bluey green is also going to act, I think I might have added a little bit of red in there as well actually to make it a little more purpley, but that's adding in a little bit of a shadow color, because the canopies of the trees are obviously casting a shadow onto the hedges below. And then here's a perfect example of how I can use quite a big flat brush. I mean, it's not massive, is it? It's only about ½ an inch wide, but compared to the size of the trees I'm painting, it's pretty big. And you can see that just by touching the tips of the bristles down onto the paper, I get a nice straight line. But not only that, especially on those 3 lines that I put down, first of all, you can see there's some lovely variation in the quality of that line, because there's a change in the width of the line from top to